Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of History Quest. As you'll notice that today we're not in the studio. Instead, we're broadcasting from my home office in Biscay, Minnesota. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, almost everywhere is closed, including the museum and HCBN studio. So here I am in my home office broadcasting. Today I have three stories for you. One very fitting for the times. It's kind of a little bit of a piece about COVID-19 and the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. Also, I have a piece about refugees swarming Carver County from McLeod County during the Sioux Uprising. That's kind of an interesting story. And a little bit more of a lighthearted tale about Biscay and the pronunciation, or the story of the pronunciation behind Biscay. So those are the three stories we're going to have for you this month. So sit back and enjoy, and I'll be right back. Thanks. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, is a quote by Mark Twain. The world is a curious place. Every day we make history by doing the same thing we did yesterday. We wake in the morning, we go to our jobs, try to make a little money, go home, spend some time with loved ones, watch the same old headlines on the news, and then we go to bed. The next morning we wake and we do it again. In the average lifespan, we will repeat this process 31,390 times. And in that span, we see nations wage war, see people suffer, and we hope for change. It's as if the world were a movie where the setting and the characters adjust, but the plot always stays the same. Today, our headlines are filled with COVID-19, the coronavirus. The virus has turned the world on its head. Schools and businesses are closing, professional sporting leagues have suspended play, and many Americans have chosen to quarantine. There are travel bans, the U.S. is in a state of emergency, store shelves are emptying, and a faction of the population is ready for an all-out panic. It's something that the likes of most of us alive have never witnessed, something that didn't happen yesterday. However, as history shows, this outbreak both is and isn't all that different from those in the past. The world has been shaken by sickness many times in history. Since the beginning, humankind has had to grapple with disease. Most notable is the Black Death that swept Europe and Asia in the 14th century. It killed more than 20 million people. More recently, however, were the H1N1 that killed over 12,000 in the United States, SARS, and the bird flu epidemic. However, they all pale in comparison to the deadly Spanish flu of 1918 that killed an estimated 20 to 50 million people. It was March 1918, nearly a century ago today. America was gearing up for war in Europe, a war so ghastly it was dubbed the war to end all wars. No one felt any nation would be willing to fight a war ever again with such deadly weaponry at hand. All around the nation, young men were being herded into crowded army camps to train for the trenches. One such camp was Camp Funston in Kansas. Hordes of young recruits were sent to the camp during the worst winter on record. Barracks swelled and troops were forced to sleep in tents under thin blankets. Nearby in Haskell County, Kansas, a little community was just getting over a mysterious sickness that seemed to only affect the farmers of the community. It was a flu bug that was shockingly contagious and extremely deadly. A local doctor was so terrified that he alerted the U.S. Public Health Service. Being that the outbreak was in a small community, however, the U.S. Public Health Service chose to do nothing, feeling that in a small backwater community, the sickness would soon run out of people to infect and would run its course. Meanwhile, back at Camp Funston, a company cook named Private Albert Gitchell reported to sickbay with flu-like symptoms. He was part of a batch of fresh recruits brought to the camp from Haskell County on February 28. Coughing and sneezing, the Haskell, Kansas boys crowded into a jammed-packed barracks and spread the disease. By the end of the month of March, over 1,000 troops were sick and 38 were dead. The first wave of the flu in the United States came on rapidly, but left just as fast. It was March, the end of flu season. In Europe, however, it took hold and mutated. Fresh-faced American soldiers with watery eyes and runny noses walked off the troop ships in France and spread the sickness throughout the country. By May, it had spread across Europe, killing 8 million people in Spain alone, where it earned the nickname Spanish flu. By June, it spread through India and China. By July, it was sprawling over Africa and South America. And by August, it found its way back to the docks on America's east coast. This time, however, it was far deadlier than the version that had left so many months before. The infected were suspect to severe nausea, aches, fever, and diarrhea. Many developed black blotches on their skin and would even turn blue due to lack of oxygen. Once a patient turned blue, it was only a matter of hours or minutes before they would die. Some became infected only to die as little as 12 hours later, showing no symptoms until the very end. Troops coming home on boats from Europe were sick and many were dying. Reports were of bodies being stacked like cordwood on the docks. Masks were handed out, hand sanitation was urged, and large gatherings were banned. Hospitals could scarcely keep up with the flu and swelled beyond capacity. In Philadelphia, 200,000 people crammed together on city streets to watch a parade. 3 days later, every sick bed in the city's 31 hospital was full of sick and dying patients. By the end of the week, 4,500 people were dead. Officials closed the city. All businesses and public services ceased to operate. Yet it was too late. An estimated 12,000 people were killed in Philadelphia alone. After the deadly second wave of Spanish flu, the sickness abruptly stopped. It peaked late in 1918 and then diminished to almost nothing. It simply ran out of victims. The damage had been done, however, as 500 million people worldwide had been infected with the flu, and up to 50 million perished because of it. Today, as it was in 1918, people were afraid of what tomorrow may bring. Health officials have yet to get a firm handle on COVID-19. There's no vaccine, and symptoms can be so mild that a person does not know they have it while passing it along to others. How the coronavirus will unfold is anybody's guess. We can hope that it goes to the wayside like so many others, or that a vaccine is developed to eradicate it. History has proven time and time again that when it's all over and the dust finally settles, life will still go on. For now, however, I guess we'll just have to keep our fingers crossed. Carver County, Minnesota, August 20th, 1862. It was a scene of utter chaos. Several hundred refugees were swarming the city of Carver, Minnesota. They were settlers, country folk, striving to raise families on the Minnesota frontier. Yet, just a day prior, their entire world had blown up. Nearly 1,000 Dakota warriors, angry from their treatment by the United States government, had left their reservation in the West and were on a mission to rid their ancestral lands of white settlers. The attacks were brutal. Entire families, unsuspecting of the warriors' motives, were killed or taken captive. Some war parties were particularly callous, taking time to torture their victims before killing them. Hearing news of the horrific scenes unfolding to the west, settlers fled in terror, abandoning their homes and leaving their possessions behind. In carts, wagons, or on foot, they made their way east as fast as possible, stopping on for brief periods to rest exhausted oxen or horses, all the while watching nervously to the west for approaching war parties. In Carver, Minnesota, news of the outbreak reached town the night prior when refugees from nearby Henderson began filtering in. They told of the murders to the west and spread false rumors of Fort Ridgely being wiped out by thousands of bloodthirsty warriors who were rapidly moving east to attack Fort Snelling. It certainly put the town in a state of anxiety, yet nothing could prepare them for what they would witness at sunrise. On the morning of August 20th, no Indians appeared. What came instead were several hundred refugees from neighboring McLeod County. all crazed with fear and frantically fleeing east. The locals in Carver had never witnessed anything like it before. It seemed the entire population of western Minnesota was now on their doorstep. One onlooker would later recall, "About the hour of 7 in the morning, we began to recruit the entire population of McLeod County. On they came, some on foot, some on horseback, and some on crutches, sleds, wagons of all shades of manufacture, some with great big round wheels, some with low blocky wheels, some with only 3 wheels, and some with only 2. They brought with them bundles of clothes, axes, spades, and shovels. Some more, some less of the same. Some running with children on their backs, seated upon a ponderous bundle strapped over their shoulders. Thus matters went on until in came a boy on a very spirited horse, claiming to be direct from Glencoe, shouting as he rode at full speed through the streets that the Indians had burned Glencoe to the ground and young America and were on a rapid march for Carver. Oh, such a scene I never desired to witness again." This from the Weekly Pioneer and Democrat, August 29, 1862. At the docks, a steamer was boarding refugees to bring them safely to St. Paul. It was chaos from the start. The refugees were panicking, pushing and shoving to get aboard. Mothers shrieked as children were thrown aside by grown men who raced aboard the steamer. In a matter of minutes, the pilot had to step in and stop people from climbing aboard. The steamer reached its capacity and was showing signs of strength. It didn't stop the refugees, however, as they jumped from the dock over the steamer's sides, desperately hanging on to anything that would aid them in their attempt to flee. The boat was finally able to kick off, yet the scene it left behind was of absolute lunacy. Those on shore screamed with despair for the steamer to return. They quickly found a second, much smaller craft on the shore and stampeded towards it. In a matter of minutes, it was full to the brim and heading downstream. The McLeod County residents had reason for panic. There was little to stand in the way of the attackers sweeping across the county. The army had only a marginal presence on the frontier, and a detachment of troops had already been defeated. Of course, there were some settlers who chose to stay. They built fortifications, raised home guards, and pledged to defend their communities. They were few, however, as most chose to flee, stricken with fear and absent of any reason at all. In the days to follow, some would muster enough courage to return to their communities and aid in its defense. Most would flee to St. Paul. Many would never return. Of those who returned, the majority did so long after the troubles were over. This entire episode of Minnesota history would not last long, yet a multitude of damage was done. When it was all over, anywhere from 450 to 800 civilians perished on the prairies, and approximately 150 Dakota warriors were killed. Not to mention the entire nation of Dakota Sioux in Minnesota were removed from the state, most of whom had nothing to do with the war. It stands today as the bloodiest period of state and local history, at a time and a place that put people in a frantic state of mind. It's strange sometimes how a town gets its name. It's not often that a story behind a name is as straightforward as Hutchinson or Glencoe. Oftentimes, a name has a local legend behind it, one that's very interesting, but may or may not be based in fact. Take Kaniska, for example, where according to legend, an Indian traveled through town and lamented on how few women lived there. He exclaimed, "Koniska," which apparently means no women. Whether it's true or not remains to be seen, though it is somewhat humorous. There is another town in McLeod County with an unusual backstory. It's called Biscay. Though it's widely known that the town is named after the famous Bay of Biscay, there's no official story as to why it's pronounced differently. Recently, however, I came across a short anecdote that may shed some light on the mystery. The famous Bay of Biscay exists off France's northwest shore and extends all the way south to Spain's Port Portugal. Through history, it's been the site of several fierce naval battles, going as far back as the 16th century. Its shores are shallow and is apt to heavy fog and intense weather. In winter, the seas turn rough and violent storms sweep across the bay, wrecking ships and washing them ashore. It's one of history's most famous landmarks. If one were to follow the latitude line west from the Bay of Biscay and continue on to Minnesota, you'd find yourself in approximately the same region as the town of Biscay, Minnesota. This Biscay, however, is nowhere near a sea and nowhere near as large. In addition, it's pronounced differently than it is in France. In an ironic twist of fate, however, it may very well have been a French woman behind the pronunciation of Biscay, Minnesota. The 1880s was a decade of change in Minnesota. The frontier chapter of the state was over. Railroads were sweeping across the nation, and in just 2 short decades, life would change forever. Across Minnesota, small communities began to sprout along the lines. They were essential to the lines, as they supplied steam engines with water. One of these towns, referred to as a whistle-stop town, was Biscay, Minnesota. The community was clearly named after the bay in France. However, the pronunciation of the name is slightly different. Rather than pronouncing it Biscay, people refer to the little community as a Biscay. The history of the pronunciation is one not entirely known. According to local lore, however, there is a humorous reason behind it. In 1887 to 88, the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railway Company line was being built between the communities of Glencoe and Hutchinson. Along the line was the town that would become known as Biscay. Just northwest of the eventual town was a farmer and his French wife. The farmer was contracted by the railroad to feed the workers as they came through. On the menu for the workers was biscuits, a staple food for the people living on the once limitless frontier. The man's wife, being French, however, mispronounced the word. Instead of saying biscuit, she said it with a French flair that came out sounding like the French word biscuit, pronounced biscuit. According to the legend, from that point on, the community was referred to as Biscay. So those are our 3 stories for this month. Before we conclude our episode, however, I've got a little bit of museum news, which is kind of ironic because due to the shutdown that we've been experiencing here, we really don't have a lot of news to share, but that in a way is the news. So on March, towards the end of March, we were given the stay-at-home order. And since then, the museum has been closed to the public. We've been just kind of operating on a bare bones status. We have somebody there just a little bit each day just to check messages, check mail. We are, however, taking research requests. So you can send in for research if you're looking, to find any information on your ancestors or anything like that. And we can't always get to everything right away right now, but we are doing our best to try to get all your questions answered. In the meantime, I've been working remotely, and we are, putting out our bi-monthly magazine that should be coming out soon if you haven't already gotten it. And also just kind of working on a few little projects that I can do here on my own. Bigger news, Dave Wegscheid, the Hutchinson muralist, or I don't know if he's from Hutchinson, he's practically from Stewart. And in other news, Dave Wegscheid, the McLeod County artist who's famous for doing the Les Cuba mural on the Ace Hardware store in Hutchinson, is nearly finished with the mural that's going into the museum for our legacy wall. Kay Johnson actually just did a story about it in the Hutchinson Leader. So, if you get the Leader, you can check it out online and look for the link with Dave Wegscheid. But that will be unveiled during our grand opening, which we don't know when we're going to have yet. But as soon as we're able to allow people back into the museum, then we will hopefully be able to have our grand opening of the new edition soon after. Also, just a note, unfortunately, all of our programming from March through May has been canceled or pushed off to a later date to be determined. That was including our grand opening of the edition. Breakfast Club. We were doing our youth group, doing that once a month, and that has been, canceled for the rest of the year, unfortunately. But we will be doing it again next year. So, if any of the youth group kids are watching right now, you can come back next year, or you can come back anytime this summer after we reopen. Anyway, we would normally be doing our pork chop dinner in June and then be at the McLeod County Fair in August, not to mention all of our other monthly programs that we do. We do some stuff in conjunction with the Hutchinson Public Library, as well as our regular monthly meeting, the Breakfast Club that we do, and any other fundraisers or anything that we're planning. Everything's kind of up in the air right now because we're not 100% sure when we're going to be able to hold social gatherings. We know that the stay-at-home order is slated to end on May 4th, but at this moment right now, while we're recording this, we don't know if that's going to be extended or not. And frankly, we're not 100% certain when we're going to be allowed to hold social gatherings and allow people in. So everything right now is kind of on hold. In the event that we are able to hold an event or a social gathering, we will be planning to do our pork chop dinner, this summer. It might be pushed off to a later date, but we are still hoping we can do that. And just as well, the McLeod County Fair, as long as they don't cancel it, that's kind of up in the air as well. We'll probably be doing something for the fair. Last couple of years we did a dunking booth, and we'll see if we do something like that again, or maybe it'll be a pie in the face. I can find a good volunteer who can throw pies in the face or something like that. But it'll be something fun if we can do it. Until then, check regularly for updates on our webpage. That's mcleodhistory.org, or you can check out our Facebook, anything new that's happening. I've been putting it on Facebook, or any news. Like I said, really the news right now is there's not much news right now. So unfortunately, like I said, everything's up in the air. But so anyway, that will be the episode for this month. We'll see you again next month. Hopefully we can actually be in studio with a green screen behind me instead of my home office. So until then, have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.